My name is Claire Donnelly. I'm 29 years old. And last April, at my brother's 40th birthday dinner, my sister-in-law said 4 words that unraveled 4 years of silence. 4 years of smiling through comments I should have shut down. 4 years of watching my husband stand quietly in rooms where no one bothered to ask his name. What she whispered to me in that kitchen, trembling, mascara streaked, hands wrapped around a glass she hadn't drunk from, is something I will carry for the rest of my life. And what happened at that dining table 2 hours later is the reason my mother finally stopped comparing my marriage to someone else's. But I need to take you back to where it started. The first Thanksgiving I brought my husband home. 4 years ago. I was 25. My husband and I had been together for 8 months, still in that fragile early stage where everything feels precious and slightly terrifying. He wore his good flannel shirt. He brought a pie he'd baked himself, brown butter apple, from scratch, because that's the kind of man he is. He stood in my parents' doorway, with flour still faintly visible on one forearm, and a smile that could have disarmed anyone with a working heart. My mother opened the door, looked past him, then at him, and said, "Oh, you made it." Not warm, not welcoming. The tone you use when a package arrives later than expected. My father shook his hand with a single pump. "So, you're the fireman." "Firefighter," my husband said, still smiling. "Yes, sir." My father nodded like he'd confirmed something he'd already decided. Then he turned back toward the living room without another word. The pie sat on the kitchen counter all evening. No one touched it until my brother's wife reached for it around 9 o'clock, cut herself a slice, took one bite, and said quietly, "This is incredible." She said it to no one in particular. My husband was in the other room by then, alone with a football game and a beer, excused from the conversation without anyone technically asking him to leave. That same night, my brother arrived with his girlfriend, who became his wife 6 months later. Her name was Melissa, and she arrived on the arm of the man she was dating at the time. Not my brother, but a man named Brandon, who my brother had introduced as basically family. Brandon was 34, worked in private equity, had gone to Dartmouth, and had the kind of jaw that looked like it had been designed in a focus group. My mother lit up when she saw him. Physically brightened, the way a lamp does when you turn up the dimmer. "Brandon." She hugged him before she hugged my brother. "Tell me everything. How's the fund?" I watched my husband watch this from across the room. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and took my hand, squeezed once, and let go. That was the first night. There would be many more like it. Melissa and my brother got married 11 months later, a small ceremony in Asheville. Brandon was best man. By then, Melissa and Brandon were already serious. They'd met, through my brother's social circle, moved fast, gotten engaged inside of a year. My parents adored Brandon with the specific intensity of people who have decided someone represents everything they wanted and never got. He was the son-in-law they'd imagined, the proof of something, and my husband, by contrast, became the footnote. I can't tell you exactly when the comparisons started, because they crept in gradually the way cold does when a window is left open. You don't notice the temperature dropping until you realize you've been shivering for an hour. It started subtle. My mother mentioning Brandon's new car in the same breath as asking whether my husband had gotten that promotion at the station. It escalated to holiday dinners, where my father would turn to my husband, after a long monologue about Brandon's latest deal, and say, "Things good at the firehouse?" The word firehouse delivered with a particular flatness, the way you'd describe a child's hobby. My husband never took the bait. He was patient in a way that I mistook for peace. I told myself it didn't bother him. I told myself he was above it. It took me too long to realize that above it and quietly hurting can look identical from the outside. The comment that broke something in me came on a Sunday in February, 8 months before that April dinner. My mother called while I was grading essays. I'm a school counselor, and I was reviewing some intake forms from a student I was worried about. My mother's voice was bright with the kind of excitement she usually reserved for news she was sure I'd envy. "Brandon just made partner," she said. "Can you imagine? At his age?" your father cried. I said that was wonderful. "It just makes me think," she continued. And I knew the pause that followed. I knew it the way you know a smell before you can name it. You could have had that, honey. You could have aimed for someone like that. You're smart. You're pretty. You settled. I was quiet for a moment. Through my office window, I could see my husband's truck in the driveway. He'd come home early from a 24-hour shift and gone straight to the backyard to fix the fence that had been leaning since October. He was out there in the cold, methodical, and unhurried, doing the thing that needed doing because it needed doing. I said, "I have to go, Mom." After I hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. That evening, after dinner, I asked my husband if my family ever made him feel small. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Sometimes." Just that. Sometimes. I asked him why he'd never said anything. "Because it's your family," he said. "And because you didn't ask before now." That one landed somewhere I wasn't prepared for it to land. The truth was I had been keeping a kind of peace that wasn't peace at all. I'd been smoothing things over, changing subjects, laughing at the wrong moments, making myself smaller so the room could stay comfortable. And in doing that, I had been teaching my husband a lesson I never meant to teach him, that I would choose the comfort of that room over him, every time. I went back to work on Monday with that realization sitting in my chest like a stone. I work with teenagers who come to me carrying things their families don't see, or won't see, or actively deny. I sit across from 16-year-olds and explain to them, carefully, that they deserve to be defended. That silence in the face of cruelty is not kindness. That love without protection is just affection in a costume. I had been giving that speech for 4 years, and never once applied it to myself. My supervisor, a woman named Dr. Patricia Shen, who had been doing this work for 30 years and saw through everyone, called me into her office that week. She asked how I was. I gave her the professional answer. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "That's not what I asked." I told her a version of the truth. She listened without interrupting, which was her way. "The people who are hardest to help," she said when I finished, "are usually the helpers." She paused. "What would you tell one of your students if they described your situation?" I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. The April birthday dinner was a month away. My brother was turning 40, and my parents had organized a dinner at the house, extended family, close friends, the whole production. My mother had called 3 times to remind me to dress nicely, which was her way of saying she expected it to look like a certain kind of evening. My husband asked, 2 weeks out, if we were going. "Yes," I said. "And this time I'm not letting anything slide." He looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read, not surprise exactly, more like someone who has been waiting a long time for a train and is suddenly not sure they believe it's actually coming. "Okay," he said. "I mean it. I know you do." He was quiet for a second. "I just want you to know that I don't need you to fight for me, but I would really love it if you'd stop being okay with how they treat you." I hadn't expected that. I'd been thinking about defending him, and he'd turned it around and made it about me. That was the kind of man he was. That was what my family had been calling settling. April arrived cold and gray, the kind of spring that hasn't committed yet. We pulled into my parents' driveway at 6:30. My husband was wearing a jacket I loved on him, dark green, well-fitting. He carried a card he'd spent 40 minutes writing. He didn't bring a gift because my brother had said no gifts, and unlike most people, my husband takes people at their word. I took his hand at the door. Inside, the house smelled like pot roast and flowers. My mother had arranged tulips on every surface. The table was set with the good china, which she only brought out when she wanted someone to feel honored, and I could already tell who that someone was. Brandon stood in the center of the living room, the way he always stood in rooms, like he'd called the room into existence rather than entered it. He was talking about something, and 3 people were watching him the way people watch performers. My mother was one of them. Melissa stood slightly apart from him, near the window, holding a glass of wine she wasn't drinking. She was wearing long sleeves despite the fact that the house was warm. She smiled when she saw me. A real smile, or close to one. We hugged. Her arms held on slightly longer than they needed to. "How are you?" I asked. "Good," she said. "Really good." The words were fine. Her voice wasn't quite. My brother found us and pulled me into a hug that went on long enough to be meaningful. "So glad you're here," he said. He shook my husband's hand, the way men do when they actually respect each other, and said, "Good to see you, man." My husband said it was good to see him too, and I watched his shoulders relax fractionally. My brother had always been decent to him. It was everyone else. Dinner was called at 7. We sat down, 12 people. Long table. Candles lit. My mother had put Brandon and Melissa across from my husband and me, which was either thoughtless or deliberate, and with my mother it was usually deliberate. The first 20 minutes were fine. My brother was telling a story about the hiking trip he'd taken last summer. Something about a bear and a cooler, and the table was laughing, and it felt almost normal. Then my father set down his fork and looked across at Brandon and said, "Tell us about that acquisition." I read something in the journal, and Brandon told us. He told us for 11 minutes. I counted. My father nodded along with the focused attention he usually reserved for sports and weather. My mother refilled Brandon's water glass without being asked. When Brandon finished, my father looked at my husband with the particular expression I had come to know very well, the expression of a man performing interest. "Still at Station 9? 12, my husband said. "Station 12. Going on 6 years now." Right. My father picked his fork back up. "Good for you." That was it. That was the whole exchange. I felt my husband go very still beside me. Under the table, I put my hand on his. Then I looked at my father and said, "He just completed his paramedic certification on top of his regular duties. Takes about 2 years of coursework and clinical hours." I said it the way you state a fact, not the way you pick a fight. I'm proud of him. The table was quiet for a moment. My husband looked at me. Something shifted in his eyes. My mother smiled tightly and said, "That's wonderful, honey." Then she turned to Melissa and asked about the renovation. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't fireworks. But it was the first time in 4 years I had said, out loud, in a room full of family, that I was proud of my husband. That was a new thing I had chosen to do. And I noticed that he sat differently after that. A little less braced. Halfway through dinner, while my father was deep in conversation with Brandon and my brother was talking to an aunt down at the other end, Melissa stood up and said she needed to refill the bread basket. I watched her cross into the kitchen. Something made me follow her. She was standing at the counter with both hands flat against the granite, head down, not moving. The bread basket was on the shelf above the refrigerator. She hadn't reached for it. "Hey," I said softly. She turned. Her eyes were red at the corners. "I'm fine," she said immediately. "You don't have to be." She laughed. A short, hollow sound. "I'm just tired." I looked at her sleeves. I thought about what tired looks like versus what afraid looks like. But this was my sister-in-law, not a student, and the recognition took a moment to settle. "Melissa," I kept my voice low. "Is there something you want to tell me?" She looked at me. The mask she'd been wearing all evening, the composed, pleasant, wife of the successful man mask, slipped for just a second. Underneath, it was something hollow and exhausted. The look of a person who has been performing for a very long time and has almost run out of stamina. "Not yet," she whispered. "But soon. I think soon." Those 4 words. I carried them back to the table like something fragile. The second half of dinner was louder, looser. Wine had happened. My father was laughing at something Brandon said. The party had relaxed into itself. And then Brandon, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who has never once questioned his right to be comfortable, looked at my husband and said, "Must be nice, man, knowing exactly when your shift ends." My husband looked at him. 24 on, 48 off, Brandon continued. "That's basically a part-time schedule with a hero costume." He grinned at my father. "No offense." My father chuckled. My mother looked briefly uncomfortable, then covered it. My husband set his glass down slowly. I had promised myself I would not wait. "He works 24-hour shifts," I said, keeping my voice even. "That's 24 hours of being available for people on the worst nights of their lives. He's pulled people out of burning buildings. He performed CPR on a 7-year-old last November and she lived." I looked at Brandon. "I'm not sure what your personal best is, but I'd be curious." The table was very quiet. Brandon's smile didn't drop entirely, but it recalibrated. He looked at me with something new in his eyes, not respect exactly, but the recalculation of someone realizing they'd misread the room. "No offense intended," he said. "I know," I said. "That's the part that bothers me most." My mother excused herself to check on the cake. My father developed a sudden interest in his napkin. My brother caught my eye from across the table and gave me the smallest nod I have ever seen. My husband reached under the table and took my hand. He held it for the rest of dinner. After dessert, people drifted. My father and Brandon moved to the living room. My brother was helping clear plates. The younger cousins had migrated to the back porch. I was bringing glasses to the kitchen when I heard a voice from the hallway, low and controlled in the way that anger sounds when it's working hard to seem like something else. "You embarrassed me." Then Melissa's voice, very quiet. "I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. The way you've been sitting there all night, looking like someone died. You think people don't notice? Brandon, please. Smile. Just smile. Is that so complicated?" I stood very still. I heard him move away from her, toward the living room. Then silence. I waited a moment, then went into the hallway. Melissa was standing against the wall, her arms folded across her chest, not in the posture of someone cold, but in the posture of someone trying to take up less space. Her eyes were dry, which I knew by now meant she had stopped letting herself cry a long time ago. She saw me. For a moment she looked like she might apologize, deflect, say it was nothing. Then something shifted. Some last thing gave way. "I've been trying to leave for a year," she said. The words came out almost without tone, like she'd rehearsed them so many times they'd gone flat. I crossed the hallway and stood beside her. "Tell me." She shook her head. Then she told me anyway. It had started small, the way these things do. A comment here, a correction there. The way he'd started answering questions people had directed at her. The way vacations and dinners and social events required his approval, not asked for, just required, like oxygen in a room he controlled. The way her own friends began appearing only on a list he found acceptable. The way her sister had stopped calling because the last time she'd visited, Brandon had been politely terrible to her for 3 days until she left early. Melissa had a graduate degree in design. She'd been working at an architecture firm when they met. She'd left the job 16 months into the marriage because the hours were stressful, and Brandon thought it made sense for her to be home, and she had believed, at the time, that it was her choice. "I thought I was choosing," she said quietly. "It took me 2 years to understand that I'd been managed into it." She looked down at her arms. Then she pulled up one sleeve just slightly, just enough. I didn't say anything. I just looked, and I let my face say what it needed to say. "He said I walked into a door frame," she said. "I know how that sounds. It sounds exactly like what it is." She pulled her sleeve back down. "Your parents think he's wonderful. My parents don't know anything. He's so good at it," she said. "He's so good at being the right person in public. Everyone sees this version of him, and the version I live with is completely invisible." I thought about my mother lighting up every time Brandon walked through a door. My father treating him like a measure of success. I thought about 4 years of being told I had settled, and the standard I'd been measured against, and I felt something shift in my chest, a fury that was quiet and clarifying. "My brother?" I said. "Does he know?" Melissa closed her eyes. "He suspects. I think he's been trying to find a way to ask me. But Brandon is his friend. He's known him longer than he's known me." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. I took both her hands. "He'd choose you." "I know my brother. He would choose you without hesitating." She nodded, but she looked like she'd stopped believing things people said with certainty. I heard movement from the living room. Laughter. The sound of Brandon performing. "I don't want to ruin his birthday," Melissa said. "That's not your job anymore." We stood there for another moment. Then I said, "I'm not going to push you to do anything tonight. But I need you to know that whatever you decide, you're not alone. There are people in this house who are on your side." She looked at me. A long look, searching. "I never thought you'd be one of them," she said. "You always seemed like you were trying to stay out of everything." That landed in a place I deserved for it to land. I went to find my husband. He was in the backyard with my brother, sitting on the steps, just talking. The kind of easy, relaxed conversation that happens between people who actually like each other. When he saw my face, he stood up immediately. "What's wrong?" I told him, quietly. My brother listened with a stillness that grew heavier with every sentence. When I finished, my brother was looking at the grass. "I knew," he said. His voice was low. I didn't know exactly, but I knew something. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. I've been a coward. You've been confused, I said. That's what he was counting on. My brother stood up. His face had done something. Whatever birthday warmth had been in it was gone, replaced by a clarity that was harder and older. I need to talk to her, he said. She's in the hallway. He went inside. My husband put his arm around me. We stood in the cold backyard while the sounds of the party continued through the windows. That dissonant normalcy of a gathering that doesn't know yet that everything has already changed. You did good tonight, he said. Both things. At dinner, and just now. I should have done it years ago. Yeah, he said simply. Not unkindly, just honestly. We stood there until my brother came back through the door with Melissa beside him. She was holding his hand, not like a sister-in-law and a brother-in-law, but like two people who had just agreed to something real. We're going to tell your parents, my brother said. Not everything, not tonight, but enough. Melissa looked terrified and resolved at the same time, which is the specific face of someone who has finally decided to stop waiting for the right moment. We went back inside together. My father and Brandon were at the dining table with drinks. My mother was in the kitchen with an aunt. I signaled to my husband to stay near the door, and I went to stand beside my brother. Dad. My brother kept his voice level. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out. What followed was not a neat confrontation. It was messy and halting, and my father interrupted 3 times, and my mother came in from the kitchen and made a sound when she understood what she was hearing and had to sit down. Brandon sat very still while my brother talked. His expression did the thing I had watched it do all evening, that constant recalculation, finding the angle, looking for the play. When my brother finished, Brandon said calmly, "This is an exaggeration." He looked around the table. "Linda, Robert, you know me. She's been struggling, and I've been trying to support her, and this is how it gets framed." My father looked at him. A long look. A 4-year look collapsing into a single moment. "Melissa," my father said slowly, "is that what happened to your arm at Christmas? We all saw it." Melissa looked at my father. Her voice didn't shake. He said I walked into a doorframe. Silence. "Brandon." My father set his glass down. "I think you should leave." It was that simple. I had expected more from it, more resistance, more argument, more of the performance. But something in my father's voice had closed a door, and Brandon heard it close. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Melissa once, and the look had layers in it, warning, betrayal, the flash of something cold that he wasn't quick enough to hide. "We'll talk at home," he said to her. "She's not going home with you tonight," my brother said. Brandon's jaw tightened. He looked around the room one more time. My mother wouldn't meet his eyes. My father had turned away. My husband stood quietly near the door, solid and still, a fact in the room that wasn't moving. Brandon picked up his keys from the bowl on the hallway table and walked out. The door didn't slam. That was almost worse. The silence after was like the silence after a sound you hadn't realized was constant until it stopped. My mother crossed the room and sat beside Melissa and took both her hands without saying anything. I watched my mother, who had worshipped Brandon's image for 4 years, simply set it down and show up for the person in front of her. It wasn't everything, but it was something. My brother poured everyone a glass of water, because that was the kind of person he was noticing what the moment needed. My father sat down heavily in his chair. He looked at my husband for a long moment. My husband looked back, not challenging, just present. "I owe you an apology," my father said. The words sounded like they'd cost him something. Several, probably. My husband nodded once. He didn't make it easy or hard. He just accepted it. Later that night, Melissa and my brother stayed at my parents' house. My mother made up the guest room with the focused energy of a woman channeling guilt into thread count. My brother sat with Melissa for a long time, talking through the logistics, a friend who was a family attorney, a plan for the morning, a list of things that could wait and things that couldn't. My husband and I drove home at midnight. He was quiet for most of the drive. The good kind of quiet, the kind that isn't absence but presence. "You were different tonight," he said finally. "I know. When you said you were proud of me," he paused. "That was the first time. I held that, I know. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm not asking for an apology. He glanced over. I'm just saying it mattered. Months have passed since that night. The shape of things has changed. Brandon and Melissa's separation became a divorce, which was ugly in the way these things are when someone has spent years building leverage and then has to use it. My brother's attorney friend was good, thorough, and unsentimental. Melissa got the settlement she deserved. She moved into an apartment on her own for the first time in 6 years, and spent 3 weeks just buying furniture she had chosen herself, and called me after every purchase, with the specific delight of a person rediscovering that they have preferences. Brandon's professional world suffered in the way that quiet professional worlds sometimes do not from anything Melissa said publicly, but from the accumulation of people who had noticed things over the years and finally felt permission to say them. He's no longer at the same firm. My parents have been different. Not transformed, it doesn't work that way. And I wouldn't trust it if it did. But different. My mother called my husband by his name unprompted at Easter for the first time, and not like it took effort. My father asked him about a noise the car was making, and they talked for 20 minutes, and when I walked past the kitchen, they were laughing about something neither of them bothered to explain to me. My mother and I had one real conversation about it, over coffee at her kitchen table, just the two of us. She held her mug with both hands and looked at the window for a while before she spoke. I thought I knew what a good life looked like, she said. I thought I recognized it. I waited. I saw what I expected to see. With Brandon, with all of it. I saw the surface, and I called it depth. She looked at me. I missed what was actually in front of me. I told her I understood that fear could do that, could narrow what you were able to see. Still, she said, I said things I can't unsay. You can say other things now, I told her. That's the part you can still choose. She nodded. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, briefly, then went back to her coffee. It wasn't a movie moment. It was just true. My husband came home from a double shift last week, tired in the specific way that only happens after 24 hours of being someone else's lifeline. He sat in the kitchen, and I made him eggs, and we didn't talk about anything important for a long time. Then he said, out of nowhere, "Your dad called me last week." I looked at him, asked if I'd come look at the garage door. Said he couldn't figure out the spring mechanism. He paused. I went over. We fixed it. He ordered pizza. You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. He smiled slightly. I didn't want to make it a thing. I just wanted it to be a normal thing. I thought about 4 years of Sunday dinners where my husband had been made to feel like a footnote in someone else's success story. I thought about the pie he'd brought the first Thanksgiving, sitting untouched on the counter. I thought about how long he had been quietly, patiently himself, in rooms that didn't know how to see him. The spring on the garage door was fixed. Pizza was ordered. It was just a normal thing. Some mornings I still feel the residue of those years, the muscle memory of making myself smaller, of swallowing the words that needed to be said. It doesn't disappear cleanly, but I know now where the line is. And I have learned to stand on the right side of it. Melissa is in therapy. She told me last month that she'd started sleeping without checking that the door was locked, that she'd gone a whole week without apologizing for something that wasn't her fault. She said it like it was an accomplishment, because it was. She's designing again. Just small projects for now. Freelance work, but her work. Things she made decisions about. From the first sketch to the last revision. We have lunch every few weeks. We talk about her apartment and my students and what my brother is cooking and what my husband built in the garage over the weekend. Ordinary things, the texture of a life that belongs to her. If you have been sitting through this thinking of someone, a room where you've gone quiet when you should have spoken, a person you love who you haven't protected loudly enough, a version of yourself you've been shrinking to keep someone else comfortable, I want you to hear this. The cost of that silence compounds. It accumulates in ways you don't notice, until the moment it becomes undeniable. You don't need a Brandon to get exposed at a dinner table. You don't need a crisis to give you permission to say, "This person I chose deserves better than my silence. I deserve better than my silence." Stand on the right side of the line. Even once, even quietly, then do it again. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs it. And drop in the comments, have you ever had a moment where you finally stopped being quiet? What happened after? I genuinely want to know. See you in the next one.